Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is the 28th of November 2020. I, uh, I have to say I'm just kind of tired of people not wearing masks. I mean, just like I'm looking at the trajectory of infections and deaths, and the thing that really gets me about all this is that it's not like the solution is to just dig yourself a hole and sit in it for a year. It's literally just minor inconveniences, little things that are not that big of a deal, you know. And also, we have several vaccines that are getting toward the end of stage 3 clinical trials, um, pretty much looking safe and effective, coming online very soon. Probably by Thanksgiving next year, vaccination will be pretty much a thing. And so it's not like we're asking you to not have your family vacation or family Thanksgiving for a decade. You know, it's like 1 year. Now, yes, I understand maybe your grandma is pretty high up there. Maybe you're not going to see her next year. But which is worse? You take this one Thanksgiving and do it remotely, or you put yourself in the position where you might unwittingly kill your grandma because you're a asymptomatic carrier. Just does not seem like a fucking good deal to me. And it annoys the shit out of me because we're on this upward swing, and then people are traveling all over the country, many of whom take just totally unnecessary risks. And I look at that and I'm like, come on, motherfuckers. Also, I mean, I'm a person who goes out for coffee every morning. Still do that. Took a little time off of that in the pandemic, but I came back to it. And I go to Dutch Brothers. They've been very good about having everybody there wearing a mask, using reasonably decent aseptic technique. My standards for that are a little bit higher than most people's, but still pretty decent. I would rather see more, but I don't see anyone doing a better job. So I got to give them props for that. But you'll see people hanging out outside, not doing it, not masked. You see people in their cars not wearing a mask. And the thing about the masks, and I suspect if you're watching this, you don't need to be told or convinced of it, but the thing about the mask is I'm not wearing my mask to protect me. I mean, ideally, it'd be nice if it does. But in reality, you know, the pore size on the mask is such that if droplets come near me, they'll go right through. You know, it might like decrease the number. But if I'm exposed, mask is not probably doing shit. But if I'm sick or if I'm asymptomatic and spreading, the mask keeps most of that shit contained. So I'm not spraying it out, misting everyone around me with it. I wear my mask for you, you wear your mask for me. And I think this is why I start just getting almost, I mean, I'm not an angry person. I'm not somebody who really gets like violently upset with people. But I get about as pissed as I get at anyone seeing people without these fucking masks. Because if you're not wearing your mask, what you're saying to me is I'm not going to be, and I mean, I will give you this. I walk around my neighborhood many, many meters from people, keeping on the other side of the street, all this kind of stuff. And I will not wear my mask sometimes then. But if I'm in proximity to people, it's on. And when I say proximity, I mean within, even like 5 or 6 meters, and certainly for any extended period. If I can maintain, like a decent distance, I'm a little lax about it. And I think that's, I can understand if you don't like that. I think it's reasonably okay just when you look at the sort of fall off with distance. But like smoking, I mean, I've talked about this, I think, before, but on campus at ASU, it is now a non-smoking campus, which is fucking awesome. Because it used to be that somebody would be smoking, and not even a lot of people, but like one person would be 100 meters down smoking, and even on a slightly windy day, you know, not like a sustained 20-mile-an-hour crosswind, but, you know, gusty winds, a few miles an hour, or a few knots if you like. You'd be walking, and even though they were nowhere near you, you'd smell the smoke. And it's hard to appreciate this, but that smoke is an indicator. You're normally breathing the shit that people are spraying out anyway, you just don't see it. Every one of us has a sort of cloud of shit around us. And I mean that partly as literal shit, and also partly just stuff that's like flaking off of our skin and, you know, coming from us. And, you know, we're like surrounded in this cloud of shit, if you will. And so getting close to that means if something is airborne, you're exposing yourself. So I'm making the case here basically that even what I'm doing, the very long distance, arguably not the greatest thing to do. But that being said, you know, so I'm trying to say, you know, like I'm not perfect. That being said, if you're on a public walkway or a sidewalk, or much more so, you know, like someplace where you're actually like in a contained space and in proximity to people, you're not wearing your mask, what you're saying to me is basically fuck you. Now, you may not mean it that way, you may not see it that way, but I think it's hard to argue that it's anything but. And especially, like, it's not like I'm asking you to hold your breath for 20 minutes, you know? Put on a fucking mask, very minor inconvenience. Don't travel or, you know, like take ridiculous precautions. It's not that big of a deal. And little things like that make a huge difference. If people were doing this shit, we wouldn't have this rapid growth. And also, I mean, you know, we're having rapid growth already. You have Thanksgiving, people are traveling. It's gonna go like inflect even more upward. And then in a few weeks, you know, we'll have people traveling for Hanukkah and Christmas, more Christmas probably, but, you know, traveling for that. And now you've got even more. Just when the fucking vaccines are right on the horizon. It's like, you know, and I don't mean to imply that the vaccines like magically fix everything, but they're gonna help. And if you just fucking wait 6 months or 9 months, you know, be in much better shape. So anyway, nothing to do with what I want to talk about, but that's just something I walked for my coffee this morning and I passed one person basically who was wearing a mask, and that was it. Everybody else unmasked. Now at the coffee shop, people behind the counter masked. Although also, like, getting back to this thing, people are in their cars not wearing masks. And this is what I started talking about before, but people are not wearing masks in their cars. The person in the car is probably fine, probably not exposed very much by the person in the shop, because the person in the shop is wearing a mask and the exposure time is very small. If you're in the shop, however, you're seeing God knows how many people in one of these cars. They're all spraying their mist at you, and they are going to talk to you, which means, you know, you don't see it, but as you're talking, even if you're not like flinging obvious spittle, you're spraying a mist, right? So they're spraying this mist. All you need is one person who's an asymptomatic carrier out of hundreds of people they're seeing, and they're exposing the people behind the counter, which now means that the person behind the counter is either sick or worse, asymptomatic carrier themselves, potentially exposing God knows how many other people. All because the people in the car couldn't wear their fucking mask for 5 minutes. You know, it bothers me. I realized just now, you know, like the previous one of these that I did on money, I had a couple things I wanted to say as well there that I just, I get so like caught up in a tangent, kind of lost track of it. It's an annoying thing. I think I'm gonna have to come back to that one at some point. I don't have, you know, a good congealed cluster of the stuff that I wanted to say there. But I did, like, one thing I did want to say and just to put a finer point on some of that stuff, is when you have money, it is amazing how just obviously, like, money doesn't buy happiness, all this shit. But if you have a little bit of money in the bank, your income is more than your monthly expenses. There's a point, and it's shockingly not that much as long as you're not like just spending extravagantly. There's a point where you start putting your bills on autopilot. You start, even if you're going out for dinner and this kind of stuff, and you're spending some money, you start accumulating savings without even trying. Um, it's an interesting thing when that happens. Your bills are on autopilot. You're not worrying about that shit every month. You basically start not thinking about money. And this was, it wasn't that I was in that state when I was younger. I mean, we had struggles with money, but relative to some people, doing okay. I don't think we ever really like went hungry, but we definitely had times where my mom was like, on the brink. And you could, as a kid, even though your parents are kind of protecting you from that, you can certainly pick it up and feel it, and you're aware of it, I think. When you have kids whose parents are actually like even more than that, like, oh shit, we can't afford to eat. Um, you know, it's terrible, and it makes money this thing that you're constantly aware of. Jeff Bezos might care about his score, having the highest number on some computer, but he's probably like there is no purchase that this man wants to make where he ever has to think about it. He doesn't have to debate like, oh, do I have a bill coming out? Do I have, am I going to have enough cash? And now maybe if he creates a situation where he's got an account that doesn't have enough money, and he's got to transfer some funds, maybe, but that's of his own construction. And you don't even have to be Jeff Bezos to be there. If you make a couple $100,000 a year and you don't spend ridiculously, you start getting there. When you make into the millions a year, you can spend that much. It's certainly true and possible. But realistically, I mean, here's one of the things, this is one of the reasons that like regressive taxes are so bad. The total that you can spend to do all the basic life stuff like eating, paying utilities, paying rent or mortgage, paying for your car, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that you kind of have to do. It starts out at some non-zero amount, and it does scale up. You can spend more, you can have a more expensive house, you can have a nicer car, all this stuff. You can go out to eat every day. You can go out to eat at nice places every day. But the interesting thing is, it's kind of capped. This is one of the reasons why you start seeing absurd things like people making hamburgers with a piece of gold leaf on it because they can't make food any more expensive than it, there's just the upper limit to what is practical. So they start doing shit like that or putting diamonds and stuff or, weird shit just to kind of, feel it. Because there's a point where you're like, I mean, if you're on the brink, going out for a dinner where you're spending $50 a person might feel like a nice treat. You really feel it. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing to feel it, but there's a certain kind of element of human nature where if you don't feel it, you don't feel like you're doing anything, it just doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And you have people with not even a ton of money, but a little bit of money, they start going to places and they're spending, hundreds of dollars per person. And it's like, I don't really feel it. It just doesn't seem that special. So they have to kind of ratchet things up and go to the next level. The danger with this, of course, is that it does imply that if somehow we had, all minimum basic needs met, maybe people would still kind of want to ratchet that up, which I do think actually, on the other hand, is part of why I'm convinced thoroughly that if we had universal health care and we had universal basic income that was fixed for inflation and plenty to subsist, and not just subsist, but live relatively comfortably. So you can pay rent, you can have, some entertainment. You're not like having a lavish lifestyle, but you're more than just barely scraping by. If you're there, I really think most people probably will not just kind of rest on their laurels. And I do think also, I mean, on one hand, you get artists and people who want to do things like basic research starting to flourish because now they don't have to bust their ass just to scrape by. You definitely get people, I mean, how many people don't leave a terrible job because they don't want to lose their health care, or don't leave a terrible job because they can't afford to be without a job for a few weeks or a month? If you're living paycheck to paycheck, a few weeks without a paycheck is not something that you can easily tolerate. So it just gives you so much more leverage in terms of picking and choosing where you're working and what you're doing. And so I'm convinced that actually these things will massively improve not that productivity is everything by any means, but people will start making more stuff. They'll start doing less stupid shit. Jobs that are pointless and really just a fundamental drain on society and not really adding anything will either, cease to exist, or the amount of pay that they will require will go up. The quality of those jobs will go up. And hopefully they start actually feeling like they mean something more than people that just go to work 9 to 5 and feel like they're just like, moving, I don't know, moving beads on an abacus and not really accomplishing anything, not doing anything that matters to them or anyone else. So, I mean, this is, I think it's almost a complete unalloyed good. And I think even like I've talked about this before, but even if somebody is just gonna go like sit at home and play video games all day, is that so bad? Like, I don't think that's gonna be a massive thing, but if people want to do it, fucking let them. And I'll tell you why. Because, okay, you let a couple people do that shit. How many more people are you letting not struggle, not have money be the central focus of their lives? Not having to sit there and worry with every purchase. Like, is this gonna run through? Am I gonna, is my card gonna get accepted? I don't know. I'm gonna get off the money thing in a second, but years ago, got a small, annoyingly small. This is a guy that I'd like to get off my books too, but a very small investment from somebody who was telling me this story, basically about when he was starting his company. And he's at some fucking luxury resort. I don't know. This is his hardship in starting his company. And, he's having a really nice dinner, and he gets embarrassed slightly because not all of his cards, one of his cards gets rejected. Yeah. And this is a guy who has enough money that, and even at the time, never really struggling. And you hear this kind of story, and it's like, I don't know, there's something almost offensive about it when you know how badly some people are struggling. I've certainly struggled more than that myself, and I'm relatively privileged. And it just, like, as he's telling this story, I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Come on, get some fucking perspective. So anyway, that's part of my money spiel. It's like, if you have much money, I mean, this is I guess the last thing I'll say, but you have a good income, and especially if you're to that point where, you're not even trying to save and you're saving just by default, you find that your interest rates, your credit score goes up, your interest rates go down, and you can get things like having a car. You have a much nicer car, and you end up actually paying less per month because you're paying less interest than somebody who is relatively poor and has shitty credit, and they're paying more per month. People are buying, like, they're in a position where they're living paycheck to paycheck. They have to buy things on credit because there are certain things that come up. Like, you can even do a good job budgeting, and then something happens. Somebody gets sick, you have some unexpected expense, you need a repair for your car, something, you need some plumbing work done, whatever. Anything like that happens, and you're living on the edge, you exceed that, now all of a sudden, you're paying not just like, it could have just been $100 or $200, but now you're paying that plus interest, and you were already living on the edge, so that plus interest is now starting to accumulate, starts growing, and through the magic of compound interest, suddenly you're owing a shit ton of money, and you're barely scraping by, and you get in this cycle where you have to just keep putting things on the card, It's getting to be this bigger and bigger problem, and you're fucked more and more. It's annoying because so many people get looked at as being irresponsible for being in that situation. Meanwhile, again, if you have money, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can have a car and have a lease with a good interest rate. You have a nice new car that's not going to break down. It's not going to, and if it does, you've got insurance and you've got stuff covering it. It's frustrating when you look at that versus somebody who is, you have a car that is just barely hanging on, and in order to keep it running, it's expensive and hard. I've been in both. I've not been in the position where I've made like a shit ton of money, but I've been in the position where I was comfortable enough and things were, okay. And I've been in the position where, like you're just barely on the brink. And the difference is night and day. And it makes you stupider to be in that position where you're barely like scraping by and, you just think about the cognitive load of you have to manually, it's not a big thing, but every month you have to manually go through and look at your bills, do some kind of budget math, make sure that everything can work, that you can actually pay them. And, kind of like figure out like how much can I pay for this? Can I pay more than can I start paying this stuff down? Which one do you pay? Versus, oh, you just magically have money come into your account and magically it's actually growing even though you're using it. It's a very different position and it screws so many people over. You get also this will be I guess I keep blathering on about this, but yeah, I know people who think entrepreneurship is a great way out. And I got to tell you, especially without universal basic income, without healthcare, you can't, especially if you want to start a business where you're not immediately making a ton of money, or at least better than breaking even, which honestly is most businesses. If you want to do that, you just don't have the elasticity. You don't have the flexibility to do it. When people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to scrape by, that person, it's cruel and almost disgusting to tell that person, oh, just start a business, start making, so-and-so did it. And yeah, so-and-so did it. Although you start looking into how so-and-so did it, Now, there are exceptions. There are people who were born into poverty and kind of like magically got out of it through luck and effort and all of this. But the vast majority of people, it's like saying, okay, well, yeah, Bill Gates dropped out of college. Steve Jobs dropped out of college. Both of them, shit ton of money. Yeah, but those are the 2 exceptions who won versus so many people who dropped out of college and, found nothing out of it. Incidentally, I apologize for the airplane noise if you can hear it. If you can't, then I'm just distracting you for no reason. I just did, last week I did a couple of cross countries. Maybe it was last week and the following week, but I did a cross country to Tucson. Oh no, that's right. The previous one of these that I did was after my Tucson one. Last week I went to Sedona and Prescott, but Prescott because of who knows, which was interesting as well. As my first real, Tucson, I'm not saying is not a cross country, but this was my first kind of semi-destination-y place. It's fucking crazy and kind of awesome. Also, interesting to get there. Had to transition through the Class Bravo airspace over Phoenix Sky Harbor, which I did at a night flight a few weeks ago, but during the day, it's different. It's kind of cool. And it's also kind of awesome how, it's very intimidating, but at the same time, you start kind of getting more and more used to it, and it's not as big of a deal as you think. I feel good about that. This week, coming up, I'm flying to Tucson solo. It's my first of 2 long-distance cross countries solo. I'm closing in, still a ways to go before I finish my private pilot's license, but closing in on it. Feel pretty good about that, honestly. So anyway, I don't know how long I am into this, but the thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm probably going to talk about this less than I did all that other shit, just because I've blathered on so long to begin with. But the thing I wanted to talk about in the title of today's is ACAB. All cops are bastards. And this has been in my Twitter, I don't know if it's my Twitter name or profile. I think it's in the name. It's something that, I think is worth addressing because people, I do have people come up and they say things like, well, Scott, you can't make prejudicial, generalized, claims about a whole category of people. And well, first off, yeah, you can, because this is an important distinction, but there are ascribed traits, like things that you're born with, your skin color. Religion gets to be a little questionable because you're born into one, but you can kind of leave it or join one. Yeah, but things like being a cop are achieved statuses, achieved traits. It's not like anyone is forcing you to become a cop. It's not like somebody is making you do it. It's not like somebody is forcing you to become a Klansman. If you want to join the Klan, you kind of did that to yourself. I can be very prejudiced against people who wear the fucking white dunce cap because, you're a fucking Klansman. You went out of your way to do it. If you're a MAGA person, it's not like I'm just going, oh, I'm prejudiced against people who were born that way. No, because you weren't born, even if your family happens to be very much like that, you're not born that kind of person. It's something that you can choose not to do. And if you're doing it, I'm fucking sorry. It's on you. So you talk about like all cops are bastards. It's a huge generalization. Do you think that's really true, Scott? And do you think that's fair? Well, kinda. Yeah, actually. And I know. I have a friend whose husband is a cop. Seems like a nice enough guy. I have another friend whose father was a cop. He died before I met her, but still, I'm sure he was a nice enough guy. Although I know some a little bit problematic, but still. Yeah, and then you look at people who, well, I'm an advisor for the NAACP Youth Council in my area. And somehow every year there's this kind of thing, and it's really, I think, driven by the police departments, but there's a thing where you have the cops come in and they have people whose job is basically PR. It's just, like they're nice people, they placate people, they talk about, how much the cops want to interact with the community and how much you should not be afraid of cops and all this stuff. And yeah, they seem like nice enough people. By all means, sure. Individually, maybe they're fine. I'm sure not all of them beat their wives, although shocking number are engaged in spousal abuse. Shocking, like when you look at the probability of somebody being a cop and beating their spouse versus the probability of someone in the general population randomly selected, it is ridiculously high versus, higher than you would like, but not like ridiculous. So there are certain things that, I'm sorry, it doesn't make you intrinsically a bad person. But what it does do, and the reason that I say this, the reason I feel okay making such a generalization, is that let's accept, a few percent of cops are the really bad apples, giant air quotes there. The few percent of cops are the ones that maim and kill and cheat and lie and do all this stuff. I contend that is actually a vast underestimate, but let's just pretend that's the case. Let's just say it. The cops that are, in air quotes, huge air quotes, good cops, are still letting those people get away with the fucking shit that they do. You have this thin blue line thing, and I hate to reference a movie, but well, I guess it's a historical guy as well. But go back to Serpico, which was the movie was made in the 70s about some guy who was a cop in the 60s and 70s, talking about the thin blue line and police corruption, all this stuff. And it wasn't a new thing then. Today, it's 2020, talking more than half a century later, or I guess depending on but like a half a century later, still there, still unaddressed. You have people, and like Phoenix police chief, Not going to mention her name, but I don't think she necessarily had bad intentions. I mean, you look at the stuff that she said, seems to be like someone who actually wanted a little bit of reform. And yet the department is so toxic and they have such, and I'm being generous there, I think, because, you know, like maybe less of it. Let's just say she really wanted things to get better. Okay, that's great. Except that the cops still do bad shit. And even when she actually tries to apply consequences, their fucking union, and I'm super pro union in general, cop unions, fucking terrible. Because they basically let bad cops get away with literal murder. They let cops do pretty much anything, and they are essentially unfireable. And even if they do get fired or reprimanded, they can go to another police department and have essentially no consequences. If almost any of us did the kind of shit that cops get away with in our jobs, we would never fucking work again. And yet they get paid extraordinarily well compared to most people. Even a rookie cop makes more than the median household income in most places. We spend, if you look at any major US city, the budget for the police is like $1 billion. Sometimes it's like 10 times that, or a few times that at least. But there are examples like New York where it's ridiculous, fucking insane. You look at the stuff. I mean, if you go to the statistics, and this is an interesting thing because I didn't have to like dig through some kind of meta study to infer this stuff. The Gilbert Police Department, which is where I live, just publishes this stuff. But you go to almost any police department, they have stats on what the callers are, what are the things that the officers are doing. 95%, and it seems to be pretty consistent. I didn't look everywhere exhaustively, but if you go to most departments, and I don't care if it's like a small town or a massive thing, something like 95% of what they do is something that does not require anyone with a gun or any kind of use of force to do. And it's not all like at least some of that is investigating crimes, but a lot of it is not even that kind of stuff. It's just stuff that could be done by a social worker or somebody who is not a cop. You start looking at this, you look at the budget, you start looking at, oh, well, yeah. I mean, and a lot of this stuff is kind of intertwined. We have the military-industrial complex, and because of that, we've produced obscene amounts of weapons, that more than we need. We have tanks getting like rolled off the assembly line and then just stuck in the boneyard because jobs. Yeah, which is a fucked up thing because it's like, okay, you could have jobs programs where you're actually building infrastructure and spending the same amount of money, but making a real investment. And instead, we have these jobs programs where you're making a few people very wealthy and you're building shit that is pointless, that even the military doesn't want it. And it's just going out into some graveyard to sit there and rot after you've built it. It's pretty fucked up. It's hard to defend. So anyway, you have a bunch of this surplus stuff going to the departments. And a lot of it, even if they get it for free, the operating and maintenance costs, like the ongoing costs for these things, are huge because they burn tons of fuel. They require complex, maintenance. They're not things, like if you have a vehicle with a turbine engine, it's not like you just have your random mechanic just working on that. That's kind of a big deal. And, I mean, even just like big diesels and APCs and this kind of stuff, pretty fucked up. So they're spending tons of money on this kind of stuff. They have all the riot gear, all this kind of thing. And then the thing that really, the point where I mean, I've talked about this before, I'm sure. I apologize for repeating myself, but the point where I really turned the corner on cops was I lived in LA for a little while. Lived in Paris, left Paris because couldn't afford the place without a roommate and had some, struggles with my roommate. Nice enough guy, but still struggles. Came to LA, lived with my mom and sister, and while I was there, a handful of things kind of happened. Not on top of each other, but you know, enough that in my mind they kind of are concurrent, even though they're over the course of months or years. One was a bunch of cops literally beat to death some schizophrenic guy at a bus stop. White guy, incidentally. Not to bring race into this, but I don't know how you can talk about cops without doing it. So this is not like, it's not just the racial thing, but my argument here is, okay, white guy has a lot of privilege and basically is at relatively lower risk, and still they will beat the shit out of you. You're a black guy, I mean, don't even fucking try. You're kind of fucked. And then, so there were a bunch of things like this that I was reading and seeing. And then I got pulled over by a couple of cops. I was just looking for a parking spot, going through a neighborhood in, I think it was West Hollywood, going to Blick Art Supply. So you go there, you find where this is. I'm behind Blick, just kind of like going around and circling to get into the garage, just because I like passed it and then right turn. Anyway, doesn't matter, but I'm there, and yes, I understand my memory fidelity is not perfect. Maybe I've just imagined that I did this properly and the cops were right, but there's a stop sign. In my memory, at least, I certainly slowed down, but I could swear, full stop, right turn, and then I'm coming back toward, down the street to turn right into the structure. And after I make my right turn, cop that's facing the direction that I'm traveling on a residential street. Now, no kids there at the moment, but still there could have been. So squad car screeches their tires, comes around, and then does like a figure 8, screeches their tires again, gets behind me, lights and sirens on, pulls me over. Which, I gotta tell you, kind of wigged me out a little bit. It's like, what the fuck did I do? And at the time, I was kind of scraping by, didn't have a lot of money. Not that I have a lot of money now, but I mean, like at the time it was really, a ticket was a big fucking deal. So, pulls me over. Do you know why I pulled you over? No, I have no fucking clue. Why did you pull me over? Well, you made a rolling stop at the stop sign. And I'm like, I swear that I didn't. And then we go back and forth a little bit, and the guy's like, well, who is the judge? Sure, you can try to argue it. Who do you think the judge, this is not me, this is the cop. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? Literally fucking told me this. Like, oh, well, I can say whatever the fuck I want, and you can try to fight it, which is going to take a lot of time and effort. But if I fight back, the judge is going to just believe the cop. And this is for some minor little trivial bullshit thing. But it kind of opened my eyes to like, okay, for some reason, cop's word is taken as though it was just fucking gold, immaculate, something that is unquestionable. Cop says something, for some reason, then in the court, and especially the jury, if there's a jury trial, not that there would be for this, but like if somebody beats somebody up or kills them, then there's a jury trial. The cops say something, it's taken to be, like ironclad, like unquestionable. And so you look at that and you're like, it kind of just opened my eyes, because it's like, again, white guy, I'm at a relatively low risk for this stuff. And they're literally going to come out and say this to me. Like, you might as well not fight it. You might as well just pay it, because if you fight it, it's like they're going to listen to me anyway, motherfucker. And, I'm sitting there going, well, shit. And I'm not saying that I'm judging all cops uniformly because of that, but I am saying this. I think pretty much all cops lie. I do think, in the course of and even the cops that start out as good cops, you kind of get indoctrinated into this situation. You find yourself in an organization where certain things are just considered normal or acceptable. And it's this thing I talk about a lot. You might not immediately go over here, but you might go here. And then once you're there, you might go here and here and here. And through a sequence of small steps, you find yourself in relatively short order in a place where you would never have considered going at the beginning. And to me, I mean, this is kind of, it gets to the crux of why I say this. You have this combination of these departments have so much fucking money. They do things that, I mean, like when I was in LA also, this is incidental, but it's something that definitely factored in to my assessment of them. I took a couple pictures of cop cars that were like parked, either double parked or they're parked in a red zone. Like the first time I took a picture of it, I'm having lunch with my mom and sister at a cafe. And there's a cop pulled over at this other store. I don't know if it was a restaurant or just like someplace where you could pick up food. But they're just parked over there in a no parking zone. And it was very obvious that they just went in to, like it wasn't an emergency, it wasn't something like that. They just went in to get lunch. And you take pictures of this and you're like, oh, look at how fucked up this is. And then you realize, oh, well, there are actually like Twitter accounts just full of pictures of cops doing illegal shit, because they can. And what I took a picture of was like, it's just normal. It's not a big deal. It's like, like everybody does it. And again, like you look at that and you're like, what the fuck? This is without even getting into the fact that they can beat and murder people with no consequence. Like cop kills somebody, more likely than not, they get put on paid administrative leave, paid vacation, and then almost likely, or more likely than not, no consequences. If there are any consequences, like say that they get fired, probably get another job. Say, and that's about the extent. But, or they maybe get like a small demotion or something. If the city gets sued incidentally because of something they did, that cop's not paying. The city, the fucking citizens who are already paying the cop a lot of money are paying. And if the cop retires because of this, we're paying their fucking pension, hundreds of thousands of dollars or more from taxpayer money to protect this cop and to let them basically get an early retirement. And so, okay, you go further. Oh, well, maybe the cop gets indicted. Probably not, but maybe they do. Goes to the grand jury, more likely than not, doesn't go to trial. In the unlikely event that goes to trial, then more likely than not, people believe the cops, people on the jury believe the cops, and let them off with nothing or a slap on the wrist. And even when they're convicted, usually there are very few consequences. So you have this waterfall of, low probabilities, and the product of all of those, in the end, gives you a very tiny fraction face any consequences. And usually, in that tiny fraction, it's not like some black guy was doing something minorly illegal. It's, the cop, who maybe happened to be black, accidentally killed some white woman, and for that you actually have to face consequences. Whereas if you murder some black dude on the street, just not even a big deal. We're just kind of let it slide. Let it go. So yeah, I think all cops are bastards, and I don't feel bad about that. And I feel like also, like I say, defund the police. I see people talking about how, you can't say defund the police. The city of Phoenix, not the biggest city in the world by any means, $1 billion a year on pigs. And, I'm sorry, it's fucked up. Every time I see cops, they fly. So above my girlfriend's place, where she lives is sort of down, and it's not downtown, but it's like in that area. There's almost every night a police helicopter just kind of like wandering around. I go to one of these flight tracking things that looks at the ADSB, and they just like fly around the city. And, I don't know what the operating costs of that and maintenance are, but it's not free. That pilot, not free, just fucking around the city and getting, like rotary wing hours. I'm not saying they're not doing anything, but for the most part, not doing anything but harassing people. You see cops, the one that I see all the time, all the fucking time, Tempe, Phoenix especially, some home, like I'll see like three, not squad cars, but these SUVs. See three of them pulled over like they're having this massive drug bust or something. And there's a homeless person at a bench and they're just there to harass them. You know, we're paying for this. That's great. We're not paying to house that person or to give them treatment if they have any kind of problem or anything like that. We're paying these people to essentially torture them and harass them and maybe arrest them or move them around or whatever. I find that reprehensible. I don't like, I mean, you see all these people bitching about how, any fraction of their federal money goes to Planned Parenthood, and a tiny, tiny fraction of that goes to abortion services, which it doesn't actually because of, rules and regulations, but they even, they say that and they're like up in arms about it. What fraction of my tax dollars goes to harassing homeless people rather than helping people? I mean, it's disgusting. You look at the military too. I mean, don't even get me fucking started there. We spend so much. We could cut our military spending, I think, in a third, and we'd still be number one in terms of military spending in the world. It's ridiculous. How much money goes to private for-profit prisons? And then you have these places, I'm trying to think, I don't want to pick the wrong company, but I think Aramark is one of them, providing food to these things. And they brag about how, like, oh, it's like $1 a day to feed people, and the food is, pretty fucking shitty. And not, I'm not saying that you should, again, don't give people in prison the hamburger with the gold leaf on it. But decent meals, it's worth it. Giving students, people in school, lunch for free that's good. It's a big deal because if you're a developing kid and you don't eat well, you don't get the proper nutrition, it's not like, oh, you're just gonna struggle a little now and then you'll recover later on, you'll be fine. It's gonna live with you for the rest of your life. Your brain development, your body development are not gonna be as good. Your health overall will not be as good. And also, beyond this, if you're starving, it's really hard to fucking pay attention in school. You're sitting there thinking, I need to eat. Good luck getting your calculus. And not that the person in that position is probably studying calculus. They're probably in like a remedial math class because they've been held back and they didn't have parents that helped them, get ahead. The thing that gets me here is just there are so many things that are easily fixable, and yet we do such the wrong thing. And so, yeah, I think, immediately you could wipe out 95% of the police forces and have no consequence to safety at all. And for that 5%, you could still do that stuff better. You get a lot of people that are like, oh, well, Scott, what are you going to do about crime if you, I gotta say, and I'm not saying like, okay, there's a seatbelt problem. Like you have the seatbelt. Do you think that the seatbelt is unnecessary? Well, the seatbelt's protecting you, so you feel like it was unnecessary. I don't think cops are the seatbelt. I think for the most part, you could remove even the police protection, and and especially when you look at things like, so that 5%, you start breaking that down. Some of those are against violent offenders. Some of them are like non-violent drug arrests and things like this, where again, you have to tease it apart, but probably didn't need armed, essentially, soldier there. And then you look at, like there's a protest, and you essentially have these people in riot gear firing weapons at peaceful protesters. It's not good. So I do think all cops are bad. All cops are bastards. And I'm sorry. I know your cousin or your aunt or your uncle or your dad or your sister or maybe you are a cop and you think you're a good, they're a good one. They're a good one. Well, I don't know. Are they actually there pushing back against this stuff? Are they doing this thin blue line bullshit? This is one of the reasons why I get so disgusted when I see these fucking blue Just, disgusting U.S. flag, desaturated with the blue line on it. I find it very, I'm not quite saying like it's a swastika or a Confederate flag, but it's right up there. And also, especially given the fact that these are a answer to Black Lives Matter. Black lives, you're born black. It's not like you chose to be. A few white people in blackface aside, it's not like you chose to be. If you're a cop, so they've got Black Lives Matter, which is something that is a response to the situation of like, apparently in many ways they don't. And then the response to this is blue lives, which is not a thing unless you're a fucking Smurf. There's no such thing as a blue life. Again, ascribed trait versus achieved trait. You get this blue lives matter shit. And also, like, this will be the end of this, but, people look at being a cop as a dangerous profession. And the thing that's crazy about this is it's not even a little bit. Now, I'm not saying it is risk-free by any means, but if you look at the ranking, it's something like, depending on the year, 15, 16 in terms of most dangerous professions. And above it are things like being a farm worker. Much more dangerous to be a farm worker than to be a cop. Farm worker doesn't get any credit for that. Now, lumberjack, you can kind of go, okay, well, I understand being a lumberjack is more dangerous than being a cop. Being a firefighter, more dangerous than being a cop, and much more useful, much more important. It's just, but being a cop, you look at some of these other professions that they are much lower risk than, and you just can't fucking accept that there's this perception that, they're, I'm putting my life at risk every day. So, and I'm so scared that people might have a gun. Don't even get me started on the Second Amendment shit, but I'm so scared that people might have a gun. I have to be ready to kill them. Fuck you, officer. I'm sorry, but I like to have the ability to not die, because you're pissing your pants about an imaginary risk that's not really there. And it's not to say that it never happens, but something happening, like a random event, again, Bill Gates dropped out of college, massive multi-billionaire. It happens, but it doesn't make it the thing. It doesn't make it like, oh, if you drop out of college, that's the trajectory you're on. If you're a cop, yeah, you can get killed at a traffic stop, but more likely than not, you're going to be fine. And much more likely than not, you're going to do the killing for no fucking reason. Much more likely than not, you're going to arrest somebody, lie about something, convince people that they did something that they didn't do, or, I'm not saying it necessarily even has to be like overt framing, although it's shocking when you look at it how much cops lie, and with no consequence at all. I can't, if I was on a jury, and this is, I'm sure, disqualifying for me to be on a jury, but if I was on a jury and I heard cop testimony, if a cop was testifying that the sky is blue and the sun is warm, I would need multiple independent sources before I would believe that. I mean that. I think cops lie more than the average person, and not a little bit more, like Trump level of lie. It's not just that they are slightly skewed a little bit. It's like the difference between, okay, the average person maybe lies very occasionally. If you give me like testimony from a random person, they might not be right, but I think they're probably more likely than not going to be at least trying to be honest. Eyewitness testimony is always, it's very problematic for other reasons, but our memories are terrible. Again, which is why I always qualify my story about, maybe I'm imagining that I actually came to a full stop, although I'm pretty sure I did. But, eyewitness testimony is problematic. Our memories are not perfect. But if a cop says something, you should just assume, and I'm not saying you should assume it's a lie necessarily, but you should certainly assume that it could very likely be. And if that's the only testimony, then there's no testimony. Yeah, I mean, you need serious corroboration before that actually holds any weight for me. So anyway, with that, all cops are bastards, Black Lives Matter, defund the police. And I'm not just saying those because, and here's another, this will be the end, but there's this whole concept of virtue signaling, which I find kind of offensive just to begin with, but it's like the only reason that certain people, I think this is one of these things where people are kind of telling on themselves. When people attribute saying stuff like that to virtue signaling, they're basically saying the only reason they would do something is because of other people's perception. The only reason they would say something is because people think that it means something. They're not actually talking about the person saying the stuff. They're saying that's them. It's the same as the person who says, like, well, if we lived in a world without laws or without borders, what's going to keep you from raping and murdering people? The person who's telling you this kind of shit, stay the fuck away from them. Because if the person is telling you, like, what's to stop people from raping and murdering if there are no laws, that person is saying, if they didn't have those borders, those things keeping them contained, maybe they would do some shit. That's my conclusion there, and I don't think I'm wrong. So anyway, as always, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I didn't blather on too much. It's funny how, every time I do this, just as an exercise of sort of psychoanalysis, auto-psychoanalysis, obviously, I'm just blathering on. I'm not like analyzing myself exactly here, but I find it, I try to introspect, and I find it interesting how much I come in with an idea, like literally ACAB was my theme and focus, and I did talk a bit about that, but the first half, something totally different. It's just kind of, what does that say about me? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. You're welcome to. Anyway, with that, thank you again, as always, and 再见.